All right, so let's talk a little bit about Jenkins terminology. In Jenkins, there are several types of things that we need to be aware of. In our simple demo, there's really four that we're going to focus on. The first is a pipeline. And a pipeline is just simply a user-defined model of a continuous delivery pipeline. It's composed of a series of steps and stages. And a stage is a part of a pipeline that's used to logically group steps. Now, stages are also displayed in the Jenkins interface to show the progress of your current pipeline and build. And finally, the step itself is the single task that Jenkins needs to complete that's inside of a pipeline. It's usually a very small thing, calling a script or going out and refreshing a Git branch or something like that. Typically one single task that needs to be executed in some particular order. And finally, a build is the result of a single execution of a Jenkins project, which can contain a pipeline. Oftentimes, it's used to refer to the execution itself. For example, like a dev build or a QA build or a master build. So it's time for a quick demo, and I'm going to frame this up a little bit before we dive into it, kind of building on what Jared had mentioned. In our demo, we're going to see some code changes using an IDE. In this case, it's Visual Studio. And then once that code change is done, we're going to push that up into a GitHub branch. So you're going to see some GitHub. Now, you could use GitLab or whatever code repository that you prefer. There's a bunch out there. And then for GitHub is going to do a webhook out to our Jenkins server, and then going to show that Jenkins server. And then part of that build process is Jenkins is going to run that Ruby script that Jared talked to, and that Ruby script is going to provision a machine using cloudforms. This is where our traditional infrastructure provisioning comes into play in this whole scheme. So cloudforms is going to request a machine to be built in our Rev environment, and then once the machine is built, we're going to run some post-provisioning playbooks from Ansible Tower to do some things. You could have this where it's running some software updates, subscribing your machine to satellite, whatever. But in our case, it's going to be a simple little script that's going to run that we're going to have fail the first time to show what a failure looks like in the process. And then it's going to succeed. We're going to fix the code, and then it's going to succeed that second time. So that's kind of the basis of the demo. And having said all that, we'll go ahead and just jump right into it. So the first things first, we're looking at our code here, and this is Visual Studio Code. We need to create a new branch. You notice we're on a dev branch. We're going to synchronize it. We're going to create our new branch here. We're going to give it something similar name. You could use feature dash some branch name, but in this case, we're going to be a simple, just a provisioning demo. So we'll name it provisioning demo here. Now we're going to make our code changes. And here is a playbook that Tower is going to run for us. And we're just simply going to change, uncomment some lines here just to show what a failure looks like. Now, we're intentionally failing this playbook to show you that process. If some bad code made it through a code review, for instance, we can show how we can catch that. So now I've got my code changed. I'm going to go up here and save the file. And then now that the file's saved, I'm on my local branch. So I need to commit those changes to my local branch. I'm going to commit those. I'm going to put a simple little commit message here. Made some provisioning code changes. And now that I've got my local branch committed, I'm going to push that up to my upstream, same as doing git push origin on the command line. And now we'll come over to GitHub, and we'll see that code has now showed up in our repo. I'm going to do a pull request. I'm going to change my base to dev because I want to push my code in from my feature branch into dev to test. I'll leave a simple little message here for my colleagues to look at. Made some adjustments to provisioning. Some simple message here so that your coworkers can see the change you made and why you made it. Even you could even address the issue directly. This fixes issue number so-and-so if you wanted. We'll create the pull request. And in our dev branch, we have branch protection set up so that we do require at least one code review before this pull request is merged. Now, since we're doing the demo here, I'm going to use my administrator privileges and just go ahead and merge this request just for the sake of time. Normally, you wouldn't do this. Normally, you'd want to have that code review so that somebody could catch my mistake in that code review process. Now that I've got my PR merged, GitHub is going to reach out via a webhook to our Jenkins server, and it's going to request a build to be kicked off. So here we are looking at our Jenkins web interface. You can see the little blue bubble pulsating, and that in the build status, we have a new build that's kicked off, which is exactly what we expected to happen. Now, this shows in progress, and it can take a few minutes depending on how quick your provisioning infrastructure is. And if we click on that build, we actually can get some details of it. So, for example, the SCM checkout that we're doing, we're finding the branch name. We're going to refresh the Tower development project. And then here over in Tower, we can actually see that Jenkins reached out via an API call and actually told it to refresh its branch. So we have refreshed our branch now. Going back over to Jenkins, now we see that the next step is to refresh the cloudforms domain, and then that's completed, and now we're actually provisioning a machine. And that's currently in progress. We can look at the logs here and see the shell script that ran. This goes back to the Ruby script that Jared mentioned earlier. That's actually processing the build in cloudforms. And in cloudforms, we can refresh and see, yep, sure enough, we have a new service provision that has a VM inside of it that is being provisioned currently. Now, like I mentioned, we want to simulate what a failure would look like. So at one point, CloudForms is going to reach out to Tower, and it's going to tell Tower to run this playbook as part of a post-provisioning step. And then that we know, since we made that code change, we intentionally introduced an error. We should see that error out in Tower. So with a little bit of cook and show magic, we'll kind of fast forward here a little bit, and we'll jump over to Tower. We'll refresh the screen, and we should see our Tower job run. There is a playbook run. It's currently running, and now it failed, which is what we expected because we've done the bad code in there. Looking at the logs, we can see, yeah, there it is. There's my error. I made a mistake in my process, and I can get more information here. I made a mistake in my process, which integrates with the CloudForms infrastructure. Something broke. And if we go back to the code that we'd actually changed, we can see that's actually what we put in our code. So that shows how a failure can be caught. In this process, our playbook failed in Tower, and we can come back to Jenkins. And once everything is updated, Jenkins will actually fail this build. CloudForms will fail the build when it gets the notification back from Tower that job didn't run, that there was something wrong with that job. At that point, CloudForms will fail right here. We say, wait a minute, something went wrong with our provisioning. So our VM did not provision as we expected. So that kind of shows what happens in that failure mode. And then we can see the status of that build here, kind of see what broke. And then likewise, we can go back to Jenkins, and now Jenkins is showing, hey, something broke in that build process. It did not complete like we expected. And we can see the time. It took about 3 minutes. We can also dig into the logs here and see what actually broke in that process from the Jenkins pipeline step. And then here we can see again, looking in Tower, this is the bad job that ran that broken playbook that we had. And there's the playbook run there. So that kind of shows how a failure happens. So let's fix our code. Let's take out this failure step, comment that guy out, and uncomment what we actually want to happen. In this case, we want to say, awesome, I fixed my mistake in the process, which integrates with CloudForms infrastructure. This should result in a successful build, right? So this is an example of if we had a good build. We'll save the code, same steps here. Save the code. We'll commit that new code back into our local free feature branch. We'll make a commit message. I fixed my mistake. You know, any commit message that could explain why you're making this new commit. I will synchronize my local branch up to my remote origin. In this case, it's the same as doing a git push origin. I'll come back into GitHub. I'll go back to my branch. This is that upstream origin branch. There it is. You can see a few moments ago the code is updated. I'll do a new merge request. Again, changing my base to dev, because I want to take from my feature branch into dev where I fix that. I'll put another message down here for my colleagues. You know, tell them this is what happened. This is why I'm doing another commit and another merge. I fixed the mistake that I made in my code. I'm going to ask my coworkers to please review and approve this if they don't see any mistakes. I'll create my pull request, and the same process again happens. Our dev branch has protections. At least one code review is required, but for the sake of brevity for the demo, I'm going to go ahead and use my admin privileges and just force merge that request. Confirm that merge, and the same process happens again. This is that whole CI/CD iterative process where GitHub reaches out to Jenkins, starts another build. Jenkins goes through its build pipeline. In this case, we're doing the checking out the code from SCM, finding the feature branch, updating the Tower Git repository with the new code. There, that's occurred in Tower. Perfect. So Tower has got that new playbook that we just pushed up to our code base. We go back to Jenkins and we can see we refreshed our CloudForms domain just in case there was any changes to the CloudForms repository of code. And then now we're doing another provision. We're kicking off another VM provision in this case to test that code again. Hopefully, fingers crossed, everything will go correctly this time. You know we did because we produced good code here in this example. So CloudForms is going to start that VM provision process. It's calling out to Rev to provision a machine. The machine is going to get provisioned, and then CloudForms is going to do those post-provision steps where it calls out to Tower and tells Tower to run that playbook that we just committed into our code base. Then once Tower runs that playbook, it's going to report back either a success or failure. Of course, we can see all the details here in Tower. There it is. There's our playbook that ran, and we have a green bubble this time, and it's a success. We can click on that and see, yep, sure enough, there is the new code. I fixed my mistake in my Ansible process, which integrates with CloudForms. So now this should work, right? So now that Tower has completed successfully, it's ran the playbook successfully. There is the code that we had pushed up that does not result in a failure, an intentional failure. We see it's successful here. And we can go back to CloudForms and see in CloudForms, hey, we're still active. Our provision is still occurring. That's a good sign, right? We're continuing on through the process. Hopefully things will finish out in a success. And with some cook and show magic again, we'll fast forward, save a little time here. We can come back to Jenkins, monitor that process from the start to finish here in the build pipeline. We can see that we're still provisioning our VM. And that everything so far in the logs looks as expected, and this is the output from the Ruby script that we have available that does the provisioning. We can see down here that we're still waiting for the service request to complete. We're going to sleep for 10 seconds, and then we're going to check again. And we do this over and over until CloudForms gets the VM provisioned. And then once that's done, CloudForms will consider that a successful VM build, and then Jenkins will see that VM has been built successfully, and then it proceeds on to the next steps that we have. So we'll fast forward here. About 6 minutes later, our VM has completed. We can look in the logs here and say, yeah, great, our lifecycle is complete. And again, this is the output from the Ruby script, and we can see, yeah, we provisioned a VM successfully, and we also retired it successfully. So we test the whole entire lifecycle of a VM from provisioning until retirement in this pipeline. And here in CloudForms, we can see that it finished. And likewise in Tower, we'll see that the job ran successfully. And now we have a successful build. We can delete our feature branch because we know that our code that we fixed is actually working as we expected. And of course, in Jenkins, we can come back over here and look. And we can see the time of last success and last failure, and then the duration, which is good metrics to have when you want to measure how fast or how much improvement or detractor a code change has had. And looking in here in the details of the code, we can look at all the output from our Ruby script and the Jenkins pipeline itself during the build. And these last few stages are skipped because these are if we were to go from that development branch into master. So we're skipping those because we're just going into development right now. If we were to go into the master branch, that would have been the same steps. We would complete those last steps instead of skipping over them. So that completes the demo. Now, granted, in this demo, we just did a code push from a local feature branch into the upstream and then we did a merge request from that upstream feature branch into the development branch. For the sake of the demo, we just showed that one step. But if you were to go from dev to QA or QA to master, that same process is going to be identical. It's the whole iterative process of the CI/CD styles, right? Going from a feature branch to dev should look exactly the same as going from dev to QA and QA to master. That whole process looks exactly the same. So in our example, if we were to go to production with that code, it would be the same process. We would just we would do a merge request from our development branch into QA, and then once that got code reviewed and approved, that same Jenkins build would occur. And then likewise, if we were to take that code from QA and we got approval to go to production, that production code, we could just do another merge request or pull request from QA into that master branch, which would push it into production. So those same steps are really iterative in that whole entire process. So with that, I'd like to thank you for your time. Please feel free to navigate those links, dig into that code base, contribute back to us in our communities. And we thank you for being with us today and checking out the webinar.